This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. This is The Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC. Joining us now is Nick Bryant. Nick Bryant is an investigative journalist. He is actually, I think, the first serious journalist in the United States to report on Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein scandal. I think he's the first author and reporter in the country to publish Jeffrey Epstein's FAA logs, detailing and documenting who went to Epstein's island. He was also the first reporter in the country to publish Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book. He did both of those for Gawker. He went on to write an incredible book on the Franklin scandal, which is the single most significant book out there about a child sex trafficking scandal that touched the highest reaches of the U.S. government during the Bush administration. He is an investigative reporter who I respect eminently for his past record. He is, I want to say at the top, he has no ideology. He's not a Republican or a Democrat. He's not a conservative or a liberal. He's a straight-up investigative reporter who simply goes where the facts take him. He has written what I now believe is the definitive book on Watergate. That book is called The Truth About Watergate. And Nick Bryant joins us now.
Glad to be with you, Roger.
You know, Nick, unlike the Kennedy assassination, which, still remains one of the hottest topics for the American people because it's, in essence, a murder mystery, and it's a murder mystery that in the minds of many, many Americans has been solved. Has not been solved, and therefore books, articles, films, documentaries about Kennedy's assassination are still very popular. Watergate, on the other hand, which was a major national scandal that really changed the people's views of government, the people's views of the presidency, the role of the media, sadly, is a kind of a decided issue in people's minds. Richard Nixon was epically corrupt. He ordered the break-in of the Democratic National Committee. He then covered it up. His cover-up then caused his downfall. Unfortunately, virtually none of that, except for the last part, is true. And as you mentioned on my show, The Stone Zone, the other day, Watergate is an extraordinarily complex situation. There are different agendas. There are many different things going on which explain the purposes of the Watergate break-in and the major scandal which enveloped and finally took down Richard Nixon. So tell us about this book and tell us about how this fresh look at Watergate has taken you to the conclusions you have reached.
I've been a Watergate maven for about 15 years. And the thing about Watergate, it was packaged as good versus evil and All the President's Men. And then you had the very successful movie, All the President's Men, with Robert Redford. And the thing about it is people just like to look at it as a straight up good versus evil. But there's a lot of complexities. And there's been some great books written about Watergate. I mean, really good books. But they're very complex and they're tomes. And that makes it impenetrable to a lot of people because of its complexity. So with Watergate, if people want to know the truth about Watergate, they have to, first of all, be willing to accept a different narrative, and then they've got to do some work because of these complex books. Now, my job, because Watergate was a conspiracy within a conspiracy, my job in this was to make this convoluted story as simple as possible. And although I believe I made it as simple as possible, it's still complex. And I kept the word or the page count down. It weighs in at about 171 pages, which I tried to keep it very short. I tried to keep the chapters very short. And the scholarship behind it, people have told me it's pretty amazing. There's 2,200 and something citations in the book. So I really wanted to show people that this is the closest we're going to get thus far to the reality of Watergate. And I get a kick out of Garrett Graff, published an 800-page book called The Watergate, A Secret History. It was published by the New York Times, and it was reviewed by the New York Times. And he is supposed to be like a Watergate authority, but what he's done is just reconstitution of Boulder Dash, of the Boulder Dash that's been kicked around since Woodward and Bernstein. And it's kind of interesting. So Douglas Brinkley reads this 800-page tome and says no one has answered the big questions about Watergate. Who officially ordered the break-in? We know who officially ordered the break-in. It wasn't John Dean. Graff says that it was John Mitchell, but actually it was John Dean and it was Jeb Magruder. Jeb Magruder was head of the campaign finance or acting chair of Nixon's finance committee, and Dean at the time was counsel to the president. Those are the prime movers of Watergate, and there's so much evidence that they are the prime movers of Watergate. And then Brinkley also says, well, what was the aim of Watergate? Well, then it's where you get into complexity, because there were two agendas for Watergate. There was a break-in that was looking for dirt, and then there was McCord and probably Hunt's agenda of getting busted, because the military-industrial complex initiated an espionage ring against Nixon and the Nixon administration because of his negotiations with the Chinese and the Russians. And when the Nixon administration outed that, the CIA just started. The administration became very porous for the CIA, and a number of CIA people just started inundating Nixon's administration. And what's really interesting, so the aim there was, if you were a big shot and you went to the Democratic National Committee on the 6th floor of the Watergate, you would be shown pictures of prostitutes. And if you found a prostitute that you'd liked, you would go to the Columbia Plaza, which was about a block away from the Watergate, and hook up with that prostitute. And it was a CIA honey trap. There were cameras. That brothel was fitted with cameras. So Eugene Martinez, one of the burglars, had the key to that book, or had the key to the drawer where that book was kept. And when the burglars got busted, their camera was on top of that desk. So obviously they were trying to get the dirt from the DNC. That was one of the agendas, but the other agenda was James McCord, and he wanted to get busted. I mean, he really tried very hard to get busted the first break-in, and then there was a second break-in, but the security guard at the Watergate had major cognitive deficits. And he had one of his lackeys, Alfred Baldwin, call the D.C. police. And that was a setup, too, because there was a vice squad cop named Schaffler, and he was about 2 blocks away from the Watergate with a couple of plainclothes guys. And then they responded immediately to the break-in. So Schaffler knew that there was going to be a break-in. And McCord's lackey told Schaffler, or told someone in the D.C. police, that there was a break-in going on in Watergate. So those are the two agendas that were addressed. And then, this is kind of interesting, Brinkley says that such central players as Howard Hunt and James McCord cooperating with the CIA as they orchestrated the break-in. Of course they were cooperating. They were doing that for the CIA, and there's so much evidence about McCord and Hunt being part of the CIA, and their trail of lies is really telling. And it was Jim Hogan that really showed me how duplicitous McCord and Hunt were. And they did their best to make sure that they got busted in the Watergate that night. Or at least McCord did. Hunt might have been a little ambivalent, but McCord certainly did.
Yeah, I think the larger takeaway here, having now read your book, is the Central Intelligence Agency was unhappy with Richard Nixon, well, because he ended the war in Vietnam faster timetable than they wanted. They were opposed to his strategic arms limitation initiative, which was successful. They were adamantly opposed to his recognition of China at a time that China was a dirt poor, backwards, non-technological agrarian society. Nixon essentially brought China in out of the cold to play them off against the Russians in order to get a strategic arms limitation agreement. Nixon knew about the Central Intelligence Agency's deep involvement in John F. Kennedy's assassination. He began demanding the CIA records on the Kennedy assassination shortly after he was elected. He was furious that he was stonewalled, pardon the expression, by the CIA in that regard. And he had already begun talking about completely reorganizing the national intelligence apparatus to take power out of the hands of unelected bureaucrats. Talks about this, by the way, in great length in his own biography. So James McCord and Howard Hunt, they are working on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency to take down Richard Nixon. And then, as you have laid out, there's a second agenda where John Dean, who refashions himself as a courageous whistleblower, but who is in fact the man who planned, pushed, and lied to Nixon about the Watergate break-in, is seeking to get the portfolio of that shows pictures of prostitutes that his wife may or may not have been one of from the DNC, either to protect himself or for use as blackmail. As you point out, Eugenia Martinez, who's still living in Miami, who I interviewed for my book on Watergate, which is not nearly as good as Nick's book on Watergate, actually not only had the key to the desk drawer where this portfolio was kept, but he actually tried to swallow it and was restrained by a D.C. police officer. The Watergate break-in, Nick, never made any sense. If you're Richard Nixon and you're leading in the polls in 49 states and you're headed for the greatest single landslide in American political history, why in the world would you authorize the break-in at the Democratic National Committee? We go one step further. Anybody with any experience in national politics, and Richard Nixon had now been on 6 national tickets, knew that there was nothing worth learning about the campaign at the Democratic National Committee. It's a backwater. The action would have been at George McGovern's headquarters. So there's never been a political motive. If you read Bob Haldeman's biography, he says openly Nixon was shocked to learn about the break-in. He couldn't figure out who would do such a stupid thing. And then John Dean, who really has reinvented his entire role here, publishes a book called Nixon's Defense, which he claims is the definitive transcription of all the Watergate recordings. Well, he conveniently leaves out the recordings of March 14th, 17th, 23rd, and 25th, I believe it is, in which he is coaching Nixon on perjury and basically reveals himself as the man who came up with, pushed, covered up, paid off the hush money to those involved, and lied to Nixon for 19 months about who was involved and who at the Watergate knew. He's also been extraordinarily litigious. He sued James Haugen, who wrote the terrific book Secret Agenda. He sued the late Len Colodny, who wrote the terrific book Silent Coup. I think he sued Phil Stanford, whose book White House Call Girl is an absolute must-read if you want to understand Watergate. So, Nick, are you concerned that he's going to sue you?
Well, we always thought that that's a possibility, but here's the thing about John Dean. He has initiated a lot of lawsuits, but he has never got on the stand to defend his position.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is Roger Stone. We're here at 77 WABC with author Nick Bryant. When we come back, we're going to tell you very quickly who Deep Throat really was. And then, yes, I'm going to give you my extraordinary family recipe for pizza again, the delicious, savory, deep dish Easter Italian delicacy right here on The Roger Stone Show. We'll be right back.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
This is Roger Stone. We're back on the Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC. We're with author Nick Bryant, whose new book, The Truth About Watergate, focusing on the liars and lies of Watergate. I've read every single book on Watergate, the good ones and the propaganda. This is the definitive work now on the Watergate break-in for those who are interested. So Deep Throat, who is alleged by Woodward and Bernstein, two of the greatest con men who ever lived, does not appear in their book, All the President's Men, does not appear in any of their reporting for the Washington Post. He only pops up later in their movie. I either believe that Deep Throat, who they later falsely allege is former FBI official Mark Felt, is most likely a composition of many sources and therefore a journalistic device. But Ray Locker wrote a terrific book called Haig's Coup, which he really makes, I think, a very tightly documented case that Deep Throat is actually General Alexander Haig, who was Richard Nixon's last chief of staff and whose real job was to move Nixon quietly to the exit. What's your assessment on Deep Throat?
Pretty much the same as yours. Deep Throat was a composite, but there was no way that Mark Felt could have provided the information. The most damning information for Nixon came from the tapes when he was recorded engaging in obstruction. And the only way Leon Jaworski, the Watergate prosecutor, could have gotten those tapes was if Haig gave them to him. And actually, Haig did give him tapes without a subpoena so he could take them back to his office and listen to them. Haig really showed his colors, and Dan Blocker was able to find just a treasure when he was digging through Woodward's and Bernstein's materials. There was actually a meeting between Haig, Woodward, and Bernstein where Haig was talking about, well, we got rid of Nixon, and you guys got a great book out of it. Now we've got to write another book, and I think it was Haig that said it'll be the final days. And prior to that, I mean, according to Woodward, he hadn't even met Haig then, but Woodward knew Haig from years earlier because he briefed, when Woodward was an Navy intelligence agent, he briefed Alexander Haig. So Woodward and Haig went way back, but if it would have come out that Haig was Deep Throat, then the whole Watergate narrative that they put together would have collapsed. And Mark Felt, I'm sure, provided Woodward with some information, but there's no way that he was Deep Throat. I mean, he had been fired by the FBI, and during a crucial 6-month period, Woodward said that he was putting like a flower pot on his patio, and Deep Throat would walk by it or drive by it, and that would signify that they had a meeting. Well, Felt had been fired for 6 months. So we're supposed to believe that Felt drove into Washington, D.C. every day looking at Woodward's patio. And by the way, you could not see the patio from the street. I mean, you had to get out of your car and actually walk about 20 yards or so. So that whole cover story with Deep Throat just falls apart. And it's so disingenuous. It's hard to believe, Roger, that they've gotten away with it. And when I say they, the media and the government, I guess, for that matter, has gotten away with these ridiculous lies for so long.
Yeah, Alexander Haig has every motive. First of all, he, in 1969, is deeply involved in the illegal wiretapping of both reporters and government officials, including White House staff, that was insisted upon by his boss, Dr. Henry Kissinger. Those wiretaps are illegal, and Haig is tied directly to them. And secondarily, Haig is well aware of the fact that Bob Woodward, who to this day denies being a naval intelligence agent, was in fact briefing the president and briefing, generally speaking, within the White House. And then lastly, there's the fact that Haig knew that the special counsel in the Senate Watergate Committee had learned about Nixon's taping system, but he doesn't tell Nixon for 2 days. So Nixon never has the opportunity to try to block their release through a claim of executive privilege. No, Al Haig is the man who was charged with removing Richard Nixon. Quickly, Nick, tell people the full name of the book and where they can get it.
The name of the book is The Truth About Watergate, A Tale of Extraordinary Lies and Liars, and you can get it anywhere where books are sold.
All right. So that would be Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and so on. Nick, Bryant, thank you so much for joining us here on The Roger Stone Show.
Thank you, Roger.
All right, folks. All right, folks. As I have promised, here is the Corbo. That's my mother's real name, maiden name. Here is the recipe for pizza gain. Pizza gain is a deep dish Easter delicacy for us Italians. It is really quite incredible and quite simple. You're going to need 4 unbaked 9-inch pie crusts. You divide those. You're going to need 2 16-ounce containers of whole milk ricotta cheese. We call that ragat. You're going to need 1 cup of shredded mozzarella cheese. You're going to need 2 large eggs. You're going to need a half pound of sweet gabagool. You're going to need a half pound of hot gabagool. You're going to need a 1/4 pound of pepperoni. Now, you can substitute mortadella. You can substitute salami. That's really up to you. You're going to need 1 large egg, slightly beaten. Now, preheat the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Press one pie crust into the bottom of each of two 9-inch pie dishes. Set that aside. Now mix together the ricotta cheese, the mozzarella cheese, the eggs in a large bowl until well combined. Chop up the sweet gabagool, the hot gabagool, the pepperoni, the mortadella, your choice. Fold it into this cheese mix. Divide it evenly between the two prepared pie dishes. Now top with the remaining pie crust, crimping the edges around to seal. Brush the top of each pie with a beaten white egg. Bake this in the preheated oven until the crust is golden brown, usually about 45 to 60 minutes, and let it cool. There you have this traditional Italian pie, which is normally prepared on Good Friday to be eaten on Easter Sunday to break the Lenten fast. This is my mother's own recipe handed down from my grandmother. So, my friends, enjoy. In the meantime, don't go anywhere. My friend Joe Piscopo will be right along with Sundays with Sinatra.